When the United States declared that it was moving its embassy to Jerusalem, thus making real the official position of the U.S. government for more than 30 years that Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish state, I was in Boston at the URJ Biennial Convention with 6,000 other Reform Jews. And in that moment, surrounded as I was by the leaders of our movement and the largest assembly of non-Orthodox Jews anywhere in the world, I felt also very much alone. What should have been a moment of, at the very least, yeah, we already knew that, and at perhaps the most, a celebration, was in fact a moment for great angst for many of those assembled in the cavernous convention hall. The presidential politics of the United States permeated nearly every aspect of this year's biennial. In a sentence, I never felt more Canadian. In 2 sentences, I wondered if I was at the right convention, because it sure seemed like a political rally, a democratic political rally at that. As our scholar in residence this past year, Rabbi Jeff Salkin, wrote about the biennial that he and I attended together, anyone who attended this biennial convention would have left with the impression that the single largest item on Reform Judaism agenda is social justice, with our youth and camping programs at a very close second, and an undercurrent of anti-Trumpism throughout. Social justice was indeed the constant theme of the special presentations during the plenary sessions. We heard from such luminaries as Senator Elizabeth Warren and Reverend William Barber, who moved me and Rabbi Salkin and all of us like no other preacher perhaps since Martin Luther King Jr. Both brought the assembled feet to their feet. But let me be clear, and as you well know, the social justice component of our movement and of my Judaism is critical and crucial to me. And I know it is to our congregation as well. Our congregation's leadership, in particular on the Syrian refugee issue, was recognized in front of the entire General Assembly of our movement at this year's biennial, with pictures of our arrival of the 2 families that we sponsored up on the big screens for all to see. As was Canada's specific involvement in the settling of Syrian refugees. Any number of my colleagues walked away from the biennial convention and they asked themselves that old Peggy Lee question, is that all there is? The answer was no. There was more, but much of that more centered on the Reform Movement's official position on Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a statement by President Trump and the planned move of the U.S. Embassy to that city. As Jewish Agency Chairman Natan Sharansky pointed out, the Reform response to the recognition of Jerusalem was terrible. When a superpower recognizes Jerusalem, first, you welcome it, and then you might offer disagreement. But ours, the movement's, was the opposite. Sharansky was referring to the December 5th statement issued by all 16 North American Reform organizations and affiliates in response to President Trump's declaration recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The operative clause that he was commenting on and that riled up me and some others was the following. Our movement wrote the following. While we share the President's belief that the U.S. Embassy should, at the right time, be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, we cannot support his decision to begin preparing that move now, absent a comprehensive plan for a peace process. End quote. There have been several attempts since to clarify this position, but not by all the original signatories. It is still the official position of the entire North American apparatus of the Reform Movement. And if our movement's affiliates have had a change of heart, all of them, I think, should say it through another statement, beginning with, we made a mistake. If not, and if our movement stands by its original statement, then I want you, my congregation, to know that this position is not my position. My position is as follows. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and the heart of the Jewish people. It always has been, and it always will be. Full stop. That should have been the position of our movement, as I truly believe it should be the position of every Jew and every Zionist. Let me then speak to those that say, wait, but what about the peace process? What about the subjugation of the Palestinians? What about their right to a state of their own Holy Land? To that, my response is yes and. Yes, they are subjugated and oppressed. And some of that is being done by the state of Israel. And much of that is being done by their own leadership. Yes, they have a right to their own state. Yes, Jerusalem is holy to them as it is to Christians, as it is to Jews. And Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel and the eternal heart of the Jewish people. It has been since Abraham first left his father's house for a land that God would show him, since Joshua crossed the Jordan, since David built the city that bears his name, since Solomon built the temple that bears the walls. It remains our eternal capital after the Greeks laid siege to it in 586 BCE, and we took it back in 516 BCE. And King Antiochus tried to do the same in 167 BCE and failed at the courageous fighting of the Maccabees. And when the Romans laid siege to it in 70 CE, and then when the Jewish people rose from the ashes of the Shoah of the Holocaust and reestablished the Jewish nation in our ancestral home in 1948, and then captured the ancient city and Jerusalem itself from the Jordanians in 1967. And even if they kick us out again, and God forbid that should happen, it will still be our capital and the focal point of our prayers that we said this evening, that we say every single day in the Amidah. Every synagogue in the world, including this one and every one in this city now that BI had a renovation, faces towards the east and faces towards Jerusalem and has for 2,000 years. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, Scripture admonishes all of us, may my right hand lose its cunning. Full stop. I am unabashedly, as you know, a progressive Jew. And in spite of my sense of alienation from our movement at the moment, I am proudly also a Reform Jew. And I firmly believe that you can absolutely hold that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and the heart of the Jewish people and still be all of those things. As Rabbi Ami Hirsch, also a Reform rabbi, wrote, and I quote from him here at some length, the world superpower finally did the right thing, and we opposed it. Our movement did. Not on the principle, but on the timing. The timing. Now is not the right time. 2,000 years later, and it's still not the right time. As if there is a peace process that the Palestinians are committed to and are pursuing with conviction. There were critics who accused the civil rights movement of moving too quickly. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s response, the time is always ripe to do what is right. In his letter from the Birmingham jail, King wrote, for years now I have heard the word wait, that our action is untimely. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see that justice too long delayed is justice denied. King often reminded us that time is neutral, that it can be used constructively or destructively. Israel's opponents have used time more effectively than we have. They have so distorted history that so many around the world question the very legitimacy of Jewish ties to Zion and Jerusalem. And we have neglected teaching and conveying even to our own children our millennia-old love affair with the land of Israel and Jerusalem as its beating heart. Judaism without Eretz Yisrael is not Judaism, and Judaism without Jerusalem is not Judaism. This is not to deny that others consider Jerusalem holy. It is not to deny that the Palestinians seek Jerusalem as their capital. And I am in favor of a two-state solution for two peoples. For that to happen, some kind of accommodation on Jerusalem will be necessary. But if and when it occurs, I will support it. But let no one be fooled. Peace will never rise on foundations of sand. Any agreement will collapse under the weight of its own inconsistencies if constructed on a scaffolding of lies. President Trump simply acknowledged reality, and it is about time. It should have been done decades ago in 1949 when Israel declared Jerusalem its capital. Many presidents, Democrats, and Republicans promised to move the U.S. Embassy and did not. The embassy will be in West Jerusalem. Who contests West Jerusalem? President Trump did not preempt the eventual borders of Jerusalem. He did not preclude a permanent status agreement. He simply acknowledged a fact. Where do people meet Israeli prime ministers and presidents and parliamentarians and Supreme Court justices? Do they meet in Tel Aviv? They do not. Where did Anwar Sadat speak when he wanted to convey on behalf of the Egyptian people a message of peace to Israelis? Tel Aviv? No, it was Jerusalem. It is for each country to declare its own capital. What other nation declares a capital unrecognized by the nations of the world? What kind of special abuse is reserved just for the Jewish people, just for the Jewish nation? And at the same time, in a yes and, it is proper and necessary for us to remind ourselves and others that we are committed to a two-state solution that will require territorial compromises from both sides, including within Jerusalem. We should continue to urge the American government and our Canadian government to help bring about a negotiated peace. And we should also urge the international community to disabuse the Palestinian national movement of its exaggerated expectations and its insidious efforts to undermine and erase our connection to Zion, our holy land. And until that happens, peace is just an illusion. And I want to close my words with those of Canadian journalist Terry Glavin, who I'm proud to say I've come to know and befriend, and who spoke here a few years ago at the Federation's Fed Talks. I'm hoping he'll speak in our congregation soon. Writing about the idea that Israel should give back the city of Jerusalem, Glavin writes, "A robust anti-imperialist analysis must rely on facts and principles first. So we begin with the fact that the Jewish state acquired control of all of Jerusalem in 1967 from Jordan. After Jordan refused Israeli entreaties to stay out of the war that Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq were waging against Israel at the time. Jordan started bombarding the heck out of Israel, and so the Israelis said, fine, be like that. And they fought back and won the war against them all and ended up in control of Jerusalem. An anti-imperialist of the current faddish disposition would demand that Israel give Jerusalem back to Jordan. But by the same logic, Jordan should give Jerusalem back to the Ottoman imperialists. But the Ottomans seized it from the Byzantine imperialists, who took it from the Roman imperialists, who took it from the Jews. And we see where that logic leads. At root of all of this is, and this is from me coming from the left and Terry as well, and I can tell you I'm not happy to admit this, it seems to me that for a great many people, mostly on the left, Israel's most unpardonable offense is not only having survived 1967, but having triumphed. Israel will never be forgiven for this, in the same way that for unreconstructed anti-Semites, Jews will never be forgiven for surviving the Shoah. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and the heart of the Jewish people. It always has been, it always will be. Trump did not make that true. It has always been true. Full stop. Thank you. Our service continues, page 586. We rise for Elaine.